Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Mavidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. Hari Om Tat Sat. So, Swami Vivekananda was in London in the fall of 1895 and delivered a series of lectures which have been collected together as Jnana Yoga. We're on chapter 3, which is titled Maya and Illusion, and it's subtitled Delivered in London. Just a reminder, in the summer of 1895, Swami Vivekananda was in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi at Thousand Island Park in New York. This was the signal from Sri Ramakrishna that he had given Vivekananda back the key, which he said he was going to keep until Vivekananda had finished his work. So Vivekananda was free at that point to simply not return to the body when he went into that Nirvikalpa state. Yet he did return. He did return. And he worked for another 7 years. Most of that time he spent in the West. He said in 1893, no, it was 1895, February of 1895, he said to the Brooklyn Ethical Association, I have a mission to the West as Buddha had a mission to the East. And so this is part of his mission. Of course, to all of us who know Swami Vivekananda well, he is a true hero, a true hero. There are many kinds of heroes in the world, very few spiritual heroes that are willing to burn themselves up, literally burn themselves up for the good of humanity. And although when he returned to India and Holy Mother, Sri Sharda Devi, was praising him greatly for his work in the West, he said, "Oh, Mother, you know perfectly well that by your mere wish you could raise up thousands of Vivekanandas." This kind of modesty is doubtless very sincere. And we have the example of Sri Krishna in the Gita taking Arjuna and showing him a tree. And from a distance, it looks like there's bundles of, the tree has borne bunches of fruit. And that's the way Arjuna reacts immediately. But then Sri Krishna takes him closer. And each of those bunches is a Krishna. So Vivekananda was simply recognizing the truth of Mother's power to create. And yet what she created, what she produced, she and the Master produced in the person of Vivekananda. So this evening we'll start reading his, you can say, very well informed uh, talk on Maya and illusion. So to start with what the Swami actually said. Almost all of you have heard of the word Maya. Generally it is used, though incorrectly, to denote illusion or delusion or some such thing. But the theory of Maya forms one of the pillars upon which the Vedanta rests. It is therefore necessary that it should be properly understood. I ask a little patience of you, for there is a great danger of its being misunderstood. The oldest idea of Maya that we find in Vedic literature is the sense of delusion. But then the real theory had not been reached. We find such passages as Indra, through his Maya, assumed various forms. Here it is true the word Maya means something like magic, and we find various other passages always taking the same meaning. The word Maya then dropped out of sight altogether. But in the meantime, the idea was developing. Later, the question was raised, why can't we know this secret of the universe? So I'm going to repeat those because this is where Swami starts off. The word Maya then dropped out of sight altogether. But in the meantime, the idea was developing. Later, the question was raised, why can't we know this secret of the universe? And the answer given was very significant. Because we talk in vain, and because we are satisfied with the things of the senses, and because we are running after desires. Therefore, we, as it were, cover the reality with a mist. Now, this is the Swami quoting, probably paraphrasing, from the Upanishads. The answer given was very significant. Because we talk in vain, and because we are satisfied with the things of the senses, and because we are running after desires, therefore we, as it were, cover the reality with a mist. Here the word Maya is not used at all, but we get the idea that the cause of our ignorance is a kind of mist that has come between us and the truth. Much later on, in one of the latest Upanishads, we find the word, much later on, in one of the latest Upanishads, we find the word Maya reappearing. But this time, a transformation has taken place in it, and a mass of new meaning has attached itself to the word. Theories had been propounded and repeated, others had been taken up, until at last the idea of Maya became fixed. We read in the Svatasvatara Upanishad, know nature to be Maya, and the ruler of this Maya is the Lord himself. So the quote from the Svatasvatara is, which is a relatively recent Upanishad, know nature to be Maya, and the ruler of this Maya is the Lord himself. Coming to our philosophers, we find that this word Maya has been manipulated in various fashions until we come to the great Shankaracharya. The theory of Maya was manipulated a little by the Buddhists too, but in the hands of the Buddhists it became very much like what is called idealism, and that is the meaning that is now generally given to the word Maya. When the Hindu says the word Maya, at once people get the idea that the world is an illusion. When the Hindu says the word Maya, at once people get the idea that the world is an illusion. This interpretation has some basis as coming through the Buddhistic philosophers, because there was one section of philosophers who did not believe in the external world at all. But the Maya of the Vedanta, in its last developed form, is neither idealism, nor realism, nor is it a theory. It is a simple statement of facts, what we are and what we see around us. People get the idea that the world is an illusion. This interpretation has some basis as coming through the Buddhistic philosophers, because there was one section of philosophers who did not believe in the external world at all. But the Maya of Vedanta, in its last developed form, is neither idealism, nor realism, nor is it a theory. It is a simple statement of facts, what we are and what we see around us. As I have told you before, the minds of the people from whom the Vedas came were intent upon following principles, discovering principles. They had no time to work upon details or to wait for them. They wanted to go deep into the heart of things. Something beyond was calling them, as it were, and they could not wait. Scattered through the Upanishads, we find that the details of subjects which we now call modern science are often very erroneous, but at the same time, their principles are correct. For instance, the idea of ether, which is one of the latest theories of modern science, is to be found in our ancient literature in forms much more developed than is the modern scientific theory of ether today. But it was in principle. When they tried to demonstrate the workings of that principle, they made many mistakes. The theory of the all-pervading life principle, of which all life in the universe is but a differing manifestation, was understood in Vedic times. It is found in the Brahmanas. There is a long hymn in the Samhitas in praise of prana, of which all life is but a manifestation. By the by, so there is a long hymn in the Samhitas in praise of prana, of which all life is but a manifestation. By the by, it may interest some of you to know that there are theories in the Vedic philosophy about the origin of life on this earth, very similar to those which have been advanced by some modern European scientists. You, of course, all know that there is a theory that life came from other planets. It is a settled doctrine with some Vedic philosophers that life comes in this way from the moon. Coming to the, that's got to startle us, that life came to us from the moon. But Swami doesn't elaborate that. Coming to the principles, we find these Vedic thinkers, very courageous and wonderfully bold in propounding large and generalized theories. Their solution of the mystery of the universe from the external world, was as satisfactory as it could be. The detailed workings of modern science do not bring the question one step nearer to solution because the principles have failed. If the theory of ether failed in ancient times to give a solution of the mystery of the universe, working out the details of that ether theory would not bring us much nearer to the truth. If the theory of all-pervading life failed as a theory of this universe, it would not mean anything more if worked out in detail, for the details do not change the principle of the universe. What I mean is that in their inquiry into the principle, the Hindu thinkers were as bold, and in some cases much bolder than the moderns. They made some of the grandest generalizations that have yet been reached, and some still remain as theories, which modern science has yet to get even as theories. For example, talking about these bold Vedic philosophers, they not only arrived at the ether theory, but went beyond and classified mind, also as a still more rarefied ether. Beyond that again, they found a still more rarefied ether. Yet that was no solution. It did not solve the problem. No amount, and here's the key, no amount of knowledge of the external world could solve the problem. But, says the scientist, we're just beginning to know a little. Wait a few thousand years and we shall get to the solution. No, says the Vedantist, for he has proved beyond all doubt that the mind is limited, that it cannot go beyond certain limits, beyond time, space, and causation. So I'm going to read that again because that's so they classified mind as a rarefied ether. Beyond that again, they found a still more rarefied ether, yet that was no solution. It did not solve the problem. No amount of knowledge of the external world could solve the problem. But, says the scientist, we're just beginning to know a little. Wait a few thousand years and we shall get the solution. No, says the Vedantist, for he has proved beyond all doubt that the mind is limited, that it cannot go beyond certain limits, beyond time, space, and causation. As no man can jump out of his own self, so no man can go beyond the limits of that, beyond the limits that have been put on him by the laws of time and space. Every attempt to solve the laws of causation, time and space would be futile because the very attempt would have to be made by taking for granted the existence of these three. What does the statement of the existence of the world mean then? What does the statement of the existence of the world mean then? This world has no existence. What is meant by that? It means that it has no absolute existence. It exists only in relation to my mind, to your mind, and to the mind of everyone else. We see this world with the five senses, but if we had another sense, we would see it something more. If we have yet another sense, it would appear as something still different. So we have the five senses. It only exists in relation to my mind, to your mind, and to the mind of everyone else. We see this world with the five senses. But if we had another sense, we would see it as it's something more. If we had yet another sense, it would appear as something still different. It has, therefore, no real existence. It has no unchangeable, immovable, infinite existence. Nor can it be called non-existence, seeing that it exists, and we slave to work in and through it. It is a mixture of existence and non-existence. Coming from abstractions to the common everyday details of our lives, we find that our whole life is a contradiction, a mixture of existence and non-existence. There is this contradiction in knowledge. It seems that man can know everything if he only wants to know. But before he has gone a few steps, he finds an adamantine wall which he cannot pass. All his work is in a circle, and he cannot go beyond that circle. The problems which are nearest and dearest to him are impelling him on day and night for a solution, but he cannot solve them because he cannot go beyond his intellect. And yet that desire is implanted strongly in him. Still we know that the only good is to be obtained by controlling and checking it. By that he means nature, by our experience of the external world. With every breath, every impulse of our heart asks us to be selfish. At the same time, there is some power beyond us which says that it is unselfishness alone which is good. Every child is a born optimist. He dreams golden dreams. In youth, he becomes still more optimistic. It is hard for a young man to believe there is such a thing as death, such a thing as defeat or degradation. Old age comes and life is a mass of ruins. Dreams have vanished into the air, and the man becomes a pessimist. Thus we go from one extreme to the other, buffeted by nature, without knowing where we are going. So I think it's time to stop and see if there's any comments or questions here. Because the Swami has made some remarkable statements. He's told us that there's no way that we're going to know through our minds. By that he means the left mind, the rational, literate, linear mind. He's not speaking of the heart. He's not speaking of the Atman. He says that through the old Vedic philosophers, the Buddhists, even Shankaracharya, they had a run at rationalizing this world of time, space, and causation, and failed, according to the Swami, because of the limitations of the mind. Any comments or questions about this?
Brother Shankara, it's
Yes,
Dennis.
please, Dennis.
Could you define the ether in which he was speaking of a page or two ago?
It's one of the 5 constituents: air, water, fire, earth, and ether. Ether, you can call it space. Now, of course, the modern quantum physicists are getting closer and closer to what the Swami will talk about as that which seems to separate us. It's not empty. It is full of energy. And of course, space pervades everything. As a matter of fact, what seems to us solid is only an artifact of the fact that what we push against this table, our fingers, the table pushes back because of the vibration. The vibration of our fingers pushes against the vibration of the table, and it seems there's a solid there. In fact, more than 99% of the fingers and 99% of the table is ether, space. So that's what's being spoken of. The Vedic philosophers, having discovered that space or ether was a living presence, this is where they, as the Swami said, they went from there to prana, the life force that pervades and promotes manifestation, which we now think of, and the quantum physicists call it the fields, the different quantum fields, the Higgs field, the quark fields. These are their definition of what the Vedic philosophers were calling prana, or life force, which is, they said, as the modern physicists are pointing to, extremely subtle. It's not a it's not a gross. It has gross manifestations, and that is the mystery. That is one of the mysteries. How do we get from quantum phenomena to Newtonian phenomena? So space, what we call space, if you remember that prayer with which we close our Sunday talks, let there be peace in outer space. Another translation would be, let there be peace in the ether. That living, but not yet manifest, but pervading everything aspect of that level of reality. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very much. That helps a lot.
Good. And thank you for the question, because I'm sure it was in some other people's minds as well. What's meant by ether? Anybody else?
Well, just on that note of ether, I wanted to, I guess, review the concepts of so that Swamiji talks about. I think I forget exactly where, but he talks about Mahakasha and Shidakasha. Akasha is just the general term for ether.
Mhm.
Um, but like the mental space is also everything is consciousness, and in the sense that we can't even make a distinction between the inner and the outer, because it's it's like the same materials that make up the earth and other planetary bodies, whether that's hydrogen or oxygen or carbon or whatever, are also a part of our bodies. And
Yes,
so it's like at the subatomic level, where it's just as you said, it's vibration. And
yes,
somehow our bodies are held together, like Earth is held together and Saturn is held together and the sun is held, but we don't know who is, or we do know. I mean, it's God, but we can never know him entirely, and we can't ever fathom how this happens. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's I don't even know how to. It's believable, of course, but it's just inscrutable. As
we have to believe it, don't we? Because it's,
yes, we do.
I mean, when people would say to Sri Ramakrishna, they would quote these Vedantic principles to him and they would say, oh, this is all unreal. Sometimes he would give them a very sharp pinch. He would pinch them. And when they said, ouch, which of course they did, he would say, I thought you told me that this was unreal. So this is what the Swami is going to lead us to. How can this be both existence and non-existence at the same time? And of course, Adi Shankaracharya called it superimposition, and Swami Vivekananda said, well, Shankaracharya, to get there, he tortured the text. Um, um, and so it's not exactly superimposition. Superimposition, of course, is the idea of there's a coiled up rope in the semi-darkness. We bump into or see this coiled up rope, and our intellect discrimination, our discriminating, it decides that it doesn't see a rope, it sees a snake. And so we've superimposed the idea of snake and we react as if it is a snake. We do. Everything in us reacts as if it's a snake, when in fact it's not a snake at all, it's a rope. So this is what Adi Shankaracharya meant by superimposition. But it's a very subtle thought. The Swami will explore some of this a bit later on in this, because he's talking about Maya and illusion. How do we get a snake out of a rope? Thank you, Divya. You're absolutely right. And the left mind, the linear, rational, processing mind, will never, it's an exitless maze. It's an exitless maze. You'll never achieve liberation through the left mind, though it can be purified, as Sri Ramakrishna points out, it can be purified to the point where it is no longer troublesome as it is to most of us now.
Is that in the sense of becoming a servant, or knowing the mind as a servant of
That's
Atman?
that's one of the bhavas, yes, one of the attitudes that can be taken. The left mind needs to have a role. It craves a role. It's designed, so to speak, to crave a role. And if we're not careful, it will take, as Jill Bolte Taylor points out so eloquently, it will take a dominating role because no one is giving it any instructions to the contrary. there's no awareness of where to come from to instruct it to the contrary. Thank you, Divya. Anything else from anyone? This is great.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, Swam.
If I understood correctly, which I very well may not have, but in one of the sessions in the Vedanta Life Academy, I think what the Swami was trying to point out, this is Swami Medananda from India, that in the state of Vijnana, like Sri Ramakrishna says, then that one is what has become all this. So even if we think that this is real, before we reach the state of Vijnana, but when we reach that state, then there is no confusion because everything is one. All that has become this.
Yes. Vijnana is a state that you will reach only after something there, as Sri Ramakrishna points out, there are many, many different kinds of samadhi. But just to use a summary term, something like Savikalpa samadhi, in which there is a total realization that the divine presence is all that is. That's all that exists in whatever form or formless state it may be. And, Sri Ramakrishna tries his best to elaborate these thoughts. You can find it in the gospel, very nicely put. But yes, Vijnana is the state where, as Sri Ramakrishna said, it's special knowledge that you no longer have to reject the world because you understand the world. As he said, you reach the roof, and then you realize that of which the roof is made, brick, lime, and brick dust, is the same thing of which the steps were made by which you reach the roof. Now that's an abstraction to us and a left brain kind of formulation until there's a higher form of realization that comes with no longer being resident in the left mind, but being resident in the heart or in the Atma.
Thank you. And also what's mind-boggling is the manifest world is only 4% or something like that. The manifest universe is only 4%, the rest is still unmanifest.
Yes, 4 or 5%. The rest is still what is now being referred to because it's simply not understood. So they have these, the physicists and scientists have these terms, dark matter and dark energy. And well, this is why the saints say, we find it in that book, Love Poems from God, that, draw a circle around all the known universe. The Lord can barely fit a toe there. In the Chandi hymn, it's said, this universe is but an infinitesimal portion of yourself, of Mother, the manifestor, the creator. An infinitesimal portion of yourself. So the physicists may be yet overestimating their 4 or 5%. Thank you, Swam. Anything else from anyone?
Brother Shankara, this is Katrina Collins.
Yes, Katrina.
Hi, this is great. Did the Swamis ever define existence, give a definition of existence?
Well, you'll see. Yes, indeed, he does. That's where he's getting to with all of these talks on wisdom, the wisdom tradition of Jnana.
Okay.
He will tell us what. Now he will tell us, and it will be something that will then become known to our left mind. But it's only through spiritual practice where we go sink below the activities of the left mind into the heart and into the silence that pervades, along with the ether, our being below the activities of the left mind, that we will begin to understand what he means by what he says.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet, but we'll get there. So I understand your impatience.
Brother Shankara, Rishikesh here.
Yes, Rishikesh.
Sir, I think this discussion on ether and the fact that you gave the example of the vibrations and all of that, one of the thoughts that immediately came to my mind was what Mr. Barton had put a link last time on, how the person, how you start viewing the, the planet. Like there's a lady, the video was showing there's a lady who is in a garden, and then you increasingly seeing that person from higher up. And then you see the planetary system, and then you see the galaxies and all of that. And then the reverse, you go back down into her eye until the protons and the neutrons in the atomic, subatomic level, as mentioned by Divyaji. It was very interesting. And that thought came to my mind. I wanted to share, and maybe that link might still be, can still be posted. And I think it was very good. The other thought that came to my mind was about the senses that Swamiji talks about. And immediately the mind goes is that we have our limitations. Many of the animals that are around us, and like dogs and our pets, as well as bats, for example, they are able to perceive through their abilities much more than what we as humans can see in terms of wavelengths and stuff like that, which I wonder if we had those, we would be seeing a totally different world.
Well, we are limited until we make the effort not to be. If you read chapter 3 of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, you will see that all of what is available to the other creatures is available to us as well. And this is well known to the shamans of the world, the wisdom keepers, as they're called in some traditions. That we learn our limitations. We learn our limitations. The limitations of the left mind are not as great as they seem to us, but it requires the practice of yoga as defined by Patanjali, particularly pratyahara, withdrawal from the gross senses, before we get to these more refined and expansive ability to receive and transmit on other wavelengths, as you said. What is wavelengths? Wavelengths is a measure of vibration. So, yes, you're absolutely right, Rishikesh. Other creatures have these other more. They're able to experience other wavelengths. Whales communicate with one another over great distances in the ocean. Using low frequencies, much lower than we can hear. They have to be translated for us before we can hear them. But as Patanjali points out, there are ways for us to expand our repertoire, so to speak. But the game isn't worth the candle for most of us. because it's psychic phenomena. It's still within time, space, and causation. It does not, as Swami Vivekananda, solve the problem of what is existence and how does existence come into being.
Yeah, thank you. That was very interesting. I didn't think in those terms. But yeah, that was very intriguing.
Good, good. Okay, anything else? This is exactly what this is for. This is a class, not a lecture. So anything more? Okay. So Swami Vivekananda, thus we go from one extreme to another, buffeted by nature, because we don't know how to control it, buffeted by nature without knowing where we are going. It reminds me of a celebrated song in the Lalita Vistara, is that what that says? Lalita Vistara, the biography of Buddha. Buddha was born, says the book, as the savior of mankind, but he forgot himself in the luxuries of his palace. Some angels came and sang a song to rouse him, and the burden of the whole song is that we are floating down the river of life, which is continually changing with no stop and no rest. So are our lives, going on and on without knowing any rest. What are we to do? The man who had enough to eat and drink, the man who has enough to eat and drink, is an optimist, and he avoids all mention of misery, for it frightens him. Tell not to him of the sorrows and the sufferings of the world. Go to him and tell that it is all good. Yes, I am safe, says he. Look at me. I have a nice house to live in. I do not fear cold and hunger. Therefore, do not bring these horrible pictures before me. But on the other hand, there are others dying of cold and hunger. If you go and teach them that it is all good, they will not hear you. How can they wish others to be happy when they are miserable? Thus, we are oscillating between optimism and pessimism. And by that he means from life to life, because we have these experiences in various lifetimes, we're told. Happy and successful in one, miserable and poor in another. Then there's the tremendous fact of death. The whole world is going toward death. Everything dies. All our progress, our vanities, our reforms, our luxuries, our wealth, our knowledge have that one end, death. That is all that is certain. Cities come and go, empires rise and fall, planets break into pieces and crumble into dust to be blown about by the atmospheres of other planets. Thus it has been going on from time without beginning. Death is the end of everything. Death is the end of life, of beauty, of wealth, of power, of virtue too. Saints die and sinners die. Kings die and beggars die. They are all going to death, and yet this tremendous clinging to life exists. Somehow, we do not know why, we cling to life. We cannot give it up. And this is Maya. All are going to death, And yet this tremendous clinging on to life exists. Somehow, we do not know why we cling to life. We cannot give it up. And this is Maya. The mother is nursing a child with great care. All her soul, her life is in that child. The child grows, becomes a man, and perchance becomes a blackguard and a brute, kicks her and beats her every day, and yet the mother clings to her child. And when her reason awakes, she covers it up with the idea of love. She little thinks that it is not love, that it is something which has got hold of her nerves, that it is not love, that it is something which has got hold of her nerves, which she cannot shake off. However she may try, she cannot shake off the bondage she is in. And this is Maya. We are all after the golden fleece. Every one of us thinks that this will be his. Does everyone know what the golden fleece is? It was a way of separating gold out from, it was a sheepskin. It was a way of separating gold from ore. It's part of a Greek myth, the details of which I've forgotten. Every one of us thinks this golden fleece will be his. Every reasonable man sees that his chance is perhaps 1 in 20 millions. Yet everyone struggles for it. And this is Maya. Does that remind you of people putting their money into the lottery? Every reasonable man sees that his chance is perhaps 1 in 20 millions. Yet everyone struggles for it. The golden fleece. The sheepskin loaded with gold. And this is Maya. And as we can see from our experience right now, how right the Swami is in this next sentence. Death is stalking day and night over this earth of ours. But at the same time, death is stalking day and night over this earth of ours. But at the same time, we think we shall live eternally. A question was once asked of King Yudhishthira. What is the most wonderful thing on this earth? And the king replied, every day people are dying around us, and yet men think they will never die. And this is Maya. So the Swami is piling up definitions here for our left mind, so that our left mind will have some conception of what Maya is and what its effects are. These tremendous contradictions in our intellect, in our knowledge, yea, in all the facts of our life, face us on all sides. A reformer arises and wants to remedy the evils that are existing in a certain nation. And before they have been remedied, 1,000 other evils arise in another place. It is like an old house that is falling. You patch it up in one place, and the ruin extends to another. In India, our reformers cry and preach against the evils of enforced widowhood. In the West, non-marriage is the great evil. Help the unmarried on one side, they are suffering. Help the widows on the other, they are suffering. I'm going to repeat that. It is like an old house that is falling. You patch it up in one place, and the ruin extends to another. In India, our reformers cry and preach against the evils of enforced widowhood. Do you know what that means? That a widow in India could not remarry. She was forced to live like a nun, shave her head, wear a featureless dress, and be as inconspicuous as possible, and often in terrible poverty. In the West, non-marriage is the great evil. That is to say, if you're widowed, well, the thing to do is get married again. Help the unmarried on one side, they are suffering. Help the widows on the other, they are suffering. It is like chronic rheumatism. You drive it from the head, it goes to the body. You drive it from there, and it goes to the feet. Reformers arise and preach that learning, wealth, and culture should not be in the hands of a select few, and they do their best to make them accessible to all. These may bring more happiness to some, but perhaps as culture comes, physical happiness lessens. The knowledge of happiness brings the knowledge of unhappiness. He's about to define this as Maya again, but let's not let this slip by. The knowledge of happiness brings the knowledge of unhappiness. If I have, I fear loss. If I'm alive and healthy, I fear illness and death. The knowledge of happiness brings the knowledge of unhappiness. Which way then shall we go? The least amount of prosperity that we enjoy is causing the same amount of misery elsewhere. The least amount of material prosperity that we enjoy is causing the same amount of misery elsewhere. This is the law. It's the physical law. There is only so much energy. If it's being used here, it's absent there. This is the law. The young, perhaps, do not see it clearly, but those who have lived long enough, and those who have struggled enough will understand it. And this is Maya. Okay, it's 8:59. I want to give an opportunity for anybody else who wants to ask a question or make a comment. Please take the opportunity.
Yes, brother Shankara.
Yes, Aaron.
If we're find ourselves in a destitute or a very bad situation, can we change our situation through the power of thought?
Of course.
And if we allow ourselves to be a victim of the misery, we will continue to find ourselves in these situations. But through positivity, we can find our way out, correct?
We mustn't think that if we're in a particular situation, that situation will persist. We have no idea what karma. We mustn't think of it so very personally as our karma. We have no idea what karma will bring. But, as Vivekananda points out, your character, who you are at this very moment, is the sum of everything that has come before. It is the sum total of everything that has come before. So if you are in restricted circumstances, poor, then you can learn and should learn. According to Sri Krishna, he's very explicit about it in the Gita. You should learn to take care of yourself and not be constantly at the mercy of the feeling of want. This is the wonder of Swami Vivekananda's little syllogism: first bread, then football, then the Gita. You cannot preach religion or learn religion on an empty stomach or when you're constantly being pursued by a feeling of want. So you have to learn what is necessary to provide for yourself. And if others depend on you, to provide for them as well. If there are others, children, old people, you learn to do enough to provide for them as well. So that's first bread. Then football. What is football? Football is not American football. Swami was talking about soccer. Soccer is a tremendously demanding game, a game that may end in great frustration. You may do your very best all game long, and the score end up 0-0 and is decided on penalty kicks. But in the demands of the game, you have learned to be a good team player. You have learned to be a good independent agent when you need to be. You have learned to be to overcome your frustration and sense of anger that things don't go your way. Many things are learned by playing that incredible team sport. What is that a metaphor for in Swami's syllogism? It is a metaphor for the game of life. So first we learn to provide for ourselves so that we're not haunted by want. Then we learn to play the game of life so that life itself does not master us. We learn those things that are necessary to where we feel like we're in command of our circumstances as a healthy ego and a healthy human being. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be reverses, but we'll know what to do in those reverses. We'll know how to behave. Of course, the Krishna in the Gita says, if you really want to be successful, do everything in a spirit of service. Offer everything to the divine. Patanjali says the same thing in the niyamas. But it's only then that you can. And this is so beautifully spelled out. Anybody who wants to get the real details of this spelled out, Swami Ranganathananda's lecture delivered in Perth, Australia in 1978 and published as the little book Divine Grace. It's only 81 pages long. It's astounding how he spells out. He never mentions Swamiji's syllogism of first bread, then football, then the Gita. But boy, howdy does he spell it out. And it is really a wonder. So Aaron, yes, you should, if there is such a thing as should, you should master taking care of yourself and not being at the mercy of want. and learn to play the game of life in such a way that you are equal to what comes to you. Then you can pursue these higher ideas. In the meantime, of course, it really helps to pray. When Jesus said, "Ask and ye shall receive, and seek ye first the kingdom of God, and else all else shall be added unto you," he wouldn't have told that to someone who was at the mercy of want, however, because they wouldn't have been able to understand him or act on it.
Could you possibly like briefly describe what you mean by the mercy of want?
Being at the mercy of want?
Yes.
Yeah, not able to pay your bills, not able to get enough work, not able to do what's necessary to take care of yourself. That's being at the mercy of want. Is that clear, or is more needed?
Yes, I understand. Yes.
Okay.
So I have a question about that.
Yes.
Only because, I think of the example of which Swami Vivekananda talks about, which is, even in an extreme state of poverty, you look at spirituality amongst the poor, for example. And the example of the poor Brahmin family who gives up their last meal to a beggar as opposed to eating themselves. I only bring that up to, again, to point out, I guess, maybe, while it's true that, to pursue some kind of a spiritual discipline, you do need to have a place where you can retreat and so on and have enough food. I also think there are examples of people that have renounced and have developed that non-attachment to the material, even in poverty, as a way of
Yes, Divya, but as a choice.
As a choice, absolutely, as choice.
And that Brahmin family that is mentioned by Swami Vivekananda, that little parable of the Brahmin family that gives up all their food to the stranger who comes to their door, they were acting from mastery. They knew the consequences. They were what Swami is pointing out in that parable and in the parable of the birds that throw themselves into the fire is that we place way too much value on this garment that we wear.
Yeah.
That if we from mastery are willing to give it up for some higher purpose, that is greatly to be wished. That is greatly to be desired, to be able to act from mastery. But only from mastery could that Brahmin family have acted that way.
Yes. And I think of the example of, Satyagraha and the Indian independence movement, for example, which was founded on, vows of non-possession and even, just complete renunciation of various things, even in, times of, even just bare bones,
But it's a choice.
but it's a choice, exactly. But I guess that's the only thing that I was thinking of, that we still have a choice.
Gandhi did not ask those who were starving to death to join his movement. No, he sponsored and promoted the idea of feeding those who were in famine.
Yes.
So this is always, we're always having to use our very best discernment to see what's true and what's correct in any given situation. But we have these guidelines. And the more we are a healthy, competent personality, as you are. I mean, you're pursuing successfully your PhD. This can only be done by a healthy, competent personality. So, and bravo, may you succeed with all glory and honors.
Thank you.
And then may you, let me give you the example of someone that I know personally very well. His name now is Swami Arupeshananda. I knew him as Chris Mitchell, or by the name that Swami Prabhavananda gave him when he was a little boy running around at the Swami's feet, Lalchand, which means full moon. He had a round face, an Irishman. He was from an Irish family. Swami Prabhavananda passed before now Swami Arupeshananda, Chris Mitchell, could be initiated by him. So he received Diksha from another Swami. That Swami told him, Chris, he was still called, he probably called him Lalchand. He said, Lalchand, get your PhD, then you may renounce the world. Well, Lalchand, Chris, did in fact get his PhD from UCLA in quantum physics at the very rarefied edge of quantum physics research. I mean, I asked him to explain to me one time, and he said, really, I can't. You'd have to know too much to understand what I'm talking about. Lalchand became Swami Arupeshananda because he followed his guru's instructions. He renounced that PhD, and he was being courted by people from all over the world. All over the world. And what he said, the reason he said that all of that was, all but one of these offers, he said was unattractive, was they wanted to weaponize the findings of his research. They wanted him to work on weaponizing it. And of course he wouldn't do that. He was tempted by one institute in Sweden that was going to endow a chair, or somebody wealthy was going to endow a chair for him there. That was the only temptation. So he became a monk. He became the Mahant, the head of the Trabuco Monastery where Swami Yogeshananda now lives. But his mother, Sita, a disciple of Swami Prabhavananda, his mother is all but helpless. And so they lived together at one of the retreat centers of the Vedanta Society of Southern California in Pinon Hills, California. And
Wow.
he's serving his mother until she finally passes from the body. That's an inspiring story from here.
It is. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. And of course, now, you may not have received any such instructions, and it's not incumbent on you to follow that path. That's not why I told the story. It's just simply that, we do have choices. And there are many choices available to us. Anything else from anyone?
Brother Shankara,
Yes, Swayam.
I wonder if thinking in terms of needs rather than wants might help us to not get too drawn into the materialistic aspects. If we think of what we need versus what we want.
Ah, yes, indeed, Swayam. If indeed your discernment is that good that you can parse them apart, it's very hard to simplify your life down to just what you need, because our left mind keeps trying to convince us that we need this, we need that, we need the other thing, when really it's a desire, not a need. And so we buy more clothing than we need. We buy more and different kinds of food than we need. We buy more furniture and fixings for our house than we need. So you're absolutely right. But it's only through practice of the yamas and niyamas, real practice of the yamas and niyamas, that we come to a sense of what we really need.
As an example, I want to share something. When I was doing masters in New Jersey, I had a friend who was living in the same building, and we used to go like shopping, Christmas shopping and all those things.
Uh-huh.
So first time when I went with him, and he taught me this lesson we are just talking right now, need versus want. So everything was on sale, big time sale just after Christmas, like is getting empty. And so we filled up everything. And before we reached to the cash register, he said, hold on, let's do a need test. And I said, what is it? And he said, okay, pick up every item in your cart and just check, do you want it or do you need it?
Good for him.
It's such a eye-opening and lesson he gave. Like it sounds like he's very miser or something, but no, we almost like left everything, hardly one or two things we could bring home.
Perfect. Exactly.
Practical example.
Yes. Oh, yeah. If ever you want to see Maya on display,
Right.
Go to it's less true now, of course, because of the virus. But it used to be that Maya was on display at the shopping malls.
Right.
And everything, the scents wafting out from the bake shops and the restaurants, the beautiful window displays for the ladies' garments and the men's garment shops, and oh my goodness, it's just it's meant to just entrance you and drag you in through the door. Thank you, Naveen. That was perfect. Let's do a needs test. Yes, indeed.
Need test. So we should all do that.
I like that, a needs test. And our needs as against, as the Swami was pointing out earlier in this talk, there are people starving and in want, cold and hungry.
And can we say prayers for these people to, like, I mean, I find myself often like I will say prayers for people because I just don't know how to like handle the sadness of our fellow human beings being in such terrible situations.
Well, of course, Aaron, And Swami Prabhupada was asked, do those prayers do any good? He said, what? Do you think you are disconnected? Of course they do good. Oh, they do good. How much good they do, it's not our business to know. So, but and it's good for us to pray for ourselves as well as for others. We can help others most successfully when we are strong, when we are healthy, when we are capable. But to pray for others, by all means, by any means. Anything else from anyone? All right. Dearest beloved Lord, we come to you in this way in order to clarify, to clean up, to make sense of what our minds do and think. Swami Vivekananda, of course, is offering the greatest of wisdom. May it reach us. May it reach below just the left mind intellectual aspect. May it reach our hearts and move us to do those things, to pursue those spiritual practices that will make these ideas a reality for us. We ask this most humbly and most sincerely. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. Every rung goes higher, higher. We want our freedom. We will keep working. And we know that the Lord, that the Mother and Father are waiting to extend their hand to us. It is through their love that this comes to us. It is through their love that we will understand it. May this be so. Om Hari Om Tat Sat. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace. Peace be unto us and to all beings everywhere. And of course, may you go from here, from wherever to however you're going, in Mother's loving and protective embrace. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Durga, Durga, Durga. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be cheerful. May you have peace of mind. So good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you, Brother Shankar.
Good night, Brother
Good
Shankar.
night.
Good night. Thank you. Hari Om.
Hari Om, Hari Om. The next opportunity for us to get together will be Saturday at 11 a.m. when we'll study Realizing God. And then on Sunday, the talk will be on earnestness and persistence. See you again soon.
Good night.
Jai Ma, Jai Ma, Jai Ma.